Hi. So I wanted to record this video as a quick introduction to LimaCharlie Query Language and the CLI that now allows you to query into LimaCharlie much more easily. Right now, this lives as a command line interface from our Python SDK, which means to install it, you just pip install LimaCharlie. As simple as that. In the future, this will also be available through the web app. So let's take a look at LimaCharlie Query. So to start it, simply LimaCharlie Query. So this will start the interface in a interactive mode. So the interactive mode is there to allow you to kind of do queries and kind of modify your queries, get the results. So the interactive mode, you will see a context. So queries have a couple different components that I'll go over, but the idea is that some of those tend to be the same over and over again. So you can set them as a context, which allows you to not have to repeat them over time. And so those are available through the various commands here that are available. So specifically, the first component of queries is the time range. So we defaulted to 10 minutes right now, but you can go and say set time, and let's say 1 hour, or let's say 48 hours. The second component is the platforms. So in our case, it's the sensors. So this allows you to set a sensor selector. And so in this case, I'll do, if the platform is Windows, or if the platform is Linux. Let's start with that. So Windows and Linux. The platform sensor selector, you can go and see what's available for you to kind of filter in our doc, so doc.limacharlie.io, and if you search for sensor selector, you should get all the information. So the last bit is the events. So what events you would like to query. So we default again to star. But in this case, let's look at events that are available. So there's autocomplete throughout this interface. So I just did set events and then tab to get a list of all of the different event types that we have seen in that particular tenant that I'm looking at. So this is per tenant. So we will only give you suggestions based on your current tenant. So let's say DNS request. Again, tab completion. So I just said DNS request, enter. So when I do that, we update automatically in the background the auto completion settings, again, very dynamically based on the data in your environment, because the data could be anything, right? It's not just the LimaCharlie EDR. You could have some custom logs. This will all handle it. So I've got my event, my context that is all set. There's a couple of other things that I could do that maybe I won't do in this case, but the set format allows you to switch between a table rendering in ASCII or JSON. There is the set output, which allows you to say, hey, in this session, I want to send all of the queries and results of my queries to a specific file on disk. I think those are sort of the main ones. You'll be able to set some limit on the number of events, for example. What will be useful is the stats command. So right now, stats tells us there's nothing, but we will be accumulating stats over your session in the CLI to be able to tell you the number of events that you've analyzed, what billing is related to your query over your whole session, things like that. So we've got a context set. Let's start by doing a dry run. So to do a dry run, we will look, we will provide it a query. So the dry run essentially will take a query and will talk to LimaCharlie API and give you an estimate, a worst case estimate of how many events would be scanned by this query and what that would look like billing wise. So in this case, the event itself doesn't really matter too much. So let's say domain name contains, and I will get back to this to explain this more. Right now, I just want to kind of demonstrate the dry run example. So let's say we do this. All right. So this query in the worst case would cost me 2 pennies. And these are just some stats around, the number of events that would be like processed. You will also see that there is an element called transcoded rule. So the LimaCharlie Query Language behind the scenes actually generates DNR rules, which is the rule engine that you can use to create automated ongoing detection and response at wire speed in LimaCharlie. So that means that it's a pretty convenient way for you to kind of do a query, whatever you have in mind, and then get a DNR rule for it that if you want, you can then bring that in and actually save as a rule for this to run in an ongoing way. So we've done a dry run. We have an idea of what our query might look like. So the next step is to actually run the query. So we have two different queries, query types. There's the Q for query and QA for query all. If you use Q for the query, we will do pagination over your query whenever possible. So that's possible only when there's no aggregation being done over the query and it is not a stateful query, meaning it's not like the relationship between parent-child. In those cases, it'll do a paginated query, which means that I could set my context to say the last 6 months of data. But if I do a paginated query, so if I just use Q, what's going to happen is that we will launch the query and get partial results that will be returned to you. You'll be able to look at those results. And then if you want more results, it will tell you if there's more pages to be fetched. You can use N just to go to the next page of results. If you do QA, very simply, it will just query all, meaning it will not do pagination. It'll just go as fast as it can over the whole thing of the query. So let's do a query all, just because 48 hours, 3 pennies in the worst case is not a big deal. So let's do a query, and I'll explain a little bit, the type of query that we're going to look at. So we are set to be looking at DNS requests from Windows or Linux. Fine. Let's query for event. So again, we have tab complete. So tab completion. So I can go event and look at all of the various components that we've seen in those DNS requests. So in this case, it's the domain name that contains. Let's do the Google contains as we did before. So let's keep it pretty simple. I could say, I could also go and say, and anyway, I could go and just add whatever field, I feel like I don't know if this is anything. So I'm just going to pick a random example. So in this case, I'll say if is not 482. I doubt that there's really any queries where that's the case, but who knows? So I've got the core filter of my query. So here I'm defining the filter that I want to apply onto all of the events. There is I could launch right now and just get the results. In fact, but no, let's not do that. And that's because what will be returned to you is the full events. So by default, we just give you the literal events, where this came from. So in this case, it would be a gigantic table because there's a lot of fields. I could, set the format to be JSON, so it's a little bit more readable, but even then. What we will do is the projection. So I can say pipe, and the next component is the projection of my query, meaning of all of the events that are going to be filtered, I want to extract parts of those, maybe rename them, maybe do some aggregation, and then that is what I want my output to be. So let's do a very simple example. And let's say going to take the domain name as a domain. So I want to call the domain name, instead of displaying that, just want to call it domain. And I will ask for the routing host name as host. And so this is just a very basic projection, right? I'm just saying, take those two fields, call them differently, and these are the results that I want. So this is going to be like a pretty decent amount of data over 2 days. But let's launch the query. You'll see it should just be a gigantic table. Here we go. There we go. So I can just go, through my results, or hit Q to just get out of it. We give you a little bit of contextual information, so the number of results. I can do, up arrow to go back to the request. The last result is cached in memory, so if I'm not sure, I just want to go and take another look, I can just go and look at it from the cache. I'm not querying LimaCharlie again. I can also go and ask for stats. So this is going to tell me so far, how many in my session, the cost of this whole session, how many things I've been querying, the last DNR rule that was sort of generated for this query. So let's do something a little bit more advanced. So let's change the time frame to be something a little bit smaller. So let's say -4 hours. So something that's a little bit tighter. And let's go through our previous query, but this time let's add a group by, where we want to group by domain. So, and we will ask for count unique host names. And then that is now host count. So now what I did is I changed the projection part of my query. Again, same filter as before, same fundamental results. But here I'm saying that I want, yes, the domain name as domain. And I want to group my results based on the domain name. And the way that I want to aggregate the host name field is count unique. So I want to know how many unique host names have resolved in the last 4 hours each given domain name. So I'll just launch it. There we go. So in the last 4 hours, each domain and the number of boxes that have resolved it. So that's really kind of the basics of it. You can change, each part of the context. You can, I could go and say set sensors, where my platform is GitHub, because I've got some GitHub sensors. And then I could say set events, and then I don't know, let's say this guy. So repository vulnerability alert dot create. So I could go and do this. And now when I specify my filter, if I go event, you can see that the suggested fields are the fields that you can expect in that specific type of event. So, I could go and say public repo is false, and event actor is hello. One thing to note is that whenever you specify literal strings in the LimaCharlie Query Language, double quotes means that those strings will be evaluated in a case insensitive. And if you do single quotes, then that will be case sensitive. So it kind of gives you that flexibility to go per field and all of that. All of the ways that you can filter. So, in this case, you saw like the contains, you saw the is. There's a wide range of operators that you can use. If you go to doc.limacharlie.io, you will see the full list. There's a very strong correlation with the DNR rules. So meaning if there's something you can do in the DNR rule, you can usually do it in LCQL and vice versa as well. So I could even go and say, you know what, I want my events to be network connections. And I want, let's pick an example where I'm going to say event, what am I looking for? Network activity, and then source, yes, source IP address is public IP. I believe that is the operator. I'm sorry, it's kind of slipping my mind. I'm just gonna do a quick check in the doc. Is public address. So I could just go and do a query like that, so I'm looking for events where of network activity where the source IP address is public. So you can again stack those. You can do some CIDR notation. So specific IP blocks start with, end with, regular expression matching. Lots and lots of different things. Cool. So that's really kind of the overview of the LimaCharlie Query Language. Let us know what you think. We always really appreciate feedback, especially in a feature that is in beta like this for us. That's fairly new. Yeah, good hunting.